it's Shirley with Spirits of Matter, and I am in a dedicated video to Mars ingress into Cancer. So, first of all, relief of a millennia of Mars being in Gemini, and I bless all of your Gemini houses for having no planet um, in Gemini for the next couple of hours until the moon hits your Gemini house. So, what a relief in the Gemini house. And then Mars ingress to the sign of its fall, just ingress today. The moon is applying 12 gold, by the way. And as I'm beginning to record this, it's a Saturn day, sun hour. The sun is in the eighth house of the chart of the beginning of this video in Aries. So the ruler of the hour is doing fairly okay, meaning the sign of its exaltation. Um, the ruler of the ascendant is Mercury, ascendant in Virgo, 18 degrees of Virgo. So this is interesting degree, um, considered malefic in degree theory. So I don't know. Mercury is applying to Chiron. Mercury is in Aries, doing pretty good except for that. Still in the eighth house. So Mars is in the 11th house, so it makes sense I will elect a time, or a time will be elected when I discuss the ingress of Mars when Mars is in the 11th house, as I'm doing a podcast. Um, and yeah, the moon is also doing fairly well. Exalted in Taurus, applying to goal is important. We'll see what will Mars do this month. And and I guess the sun hour, I guess there will be a talk about the upcoming eclipse. 20th of April, we have an eclipse in 29 degree of Aries, with Mars in the sign of its fall. And this is beginning a series of eclipses on the Aries Libra axis when the ruler of where Rahu is to be, okay, Rahu is still in Taurus, will be in its detriment, will be in Libra, and the sign of the detriment with Keto. So we've had 7 months, 7 or 9 or 7 or 9, I don't know, of Mars, months of Mars being in Gemini, and airy, fiery, quick, witty, reframing things, frame wars, information wars, um, choosing things, eliminating things, and so on and so forth. And now Mars enters the sign ruled by the moon. So, Mars being an agent of moving in a certain linear direction, um, penetrating, innovating, igniting, and enters a place that is watery, a place where it can dissolve, a place of reflections. And at this place, it's like a house of mirrors, but the mirrors are made of waters. And think about running into water. It's good for your bones. It's not as good for your um, frustration. Okay, because you have the resistance of the water to the action of Mars. The water is not moving in any linear fashion, so that the pressures being put on Mars are also unsteady. And the need of the lunar ruled Cancer is nourishment. Mars protects, and so it can provide protection. It can provide protection. So protecting over emotions, um, caretaking in a way that is protective, setting fences, setting boundaries around the things that we care for. But that can be perhaps the only potency of Mars in this sign. And let's take a look at this just for a moment from a traditional point of view. And we immediately see Mars entering um, the Mars term of Cancer. So Cancer does have a place for Mars, even though it's the sign of its fall. Cancer does have a place for Mars. Mars is applying to square the sun right now. So, you know, it's tension in the air. It's tension in the air. There is um, applying to Saturn in the Venus term of Pisces. So Mars is applying to Trine, a planet of structure that is found in the ocean. Um, and there is tension with the Sun that is in Jupiter's domain in Aries. Uh, that will, let's begin. I want to move this chart, but I also want to keep. Okay, so we'll go back and forth. We'll go back to the traditional style, or even better, going to do it the annual, as I always do, and we'll go to um, um, perhaps ingresses, transits, that's better. Let's go to Mars, and we want any aspect. And now let's go to where we are. Um, okay, so March 30th, we have the exact trine between Mars and Saturn. It's still, yeah, it's still applying to meet the sun. No, the sun is separating because she's moving faster. Sun is separating from square to Mars. So this is the exact trine to Saturn. Still in the domain of the Mars-Mars term, I believe. Let's see if we have another. Um, let's do whole sign. Um, tropical, yes. To have traditional. Let's add some. Yeah. I'm currently only adding the inconjunct. Can I do a traditional one? Custom layout. What is that? Nice. Thank you. Um, mm, nope. Traditional. Okay. So this will show us the terms, and Mars is still in Mars domain. In the 30th of March, this sextile in Saturn. Because Mars is in a place where it has a place in Cancer, um, it can do its Marcy thing. Like I said, it can be a provider of protection for the family. And it can express itself on a mundane level as protection of the motherland because or the people, the army protecting the people. That can be in certain countries. For example, in Israel we have a revolution right now, um, and the army is refusing to go along. The army is with the people. The army refuses to go along with the government. trying to gain too much power and end the social contract and the legitimacy over the monopoly of power of the state. And so the army does indeed separate. And if you saw my Israeli elections video, you've seen that I discussed that there is a danger in Israel of army regime, militant regime. Okay, the army is very prominent in the country. And so here the army sides with the people. Mars, Mars in the Mars can literally be on a mundane level in countries where there is revolution. I know Poland, some segments of Europe, definitely in segments of at least segments of the United States. The army can definitely side with the people, protect the people, perhaps even use warm like guns, warm weapons, guns, bombs, um, everything that can fire, basically. Mars can do that in order to protect the people. Okay. Some other mundane aspects can be protecting of the motherland. So here we have, or it can be people with guns. Okay, people with guns protecting themselves. Okay, the power of the people. If we are in the Pluto, Pluto is already in Aquarius, so people, armed people, ready to protect themselves, ready to shoot, ready to execute the Lokian Pflicht, Lokian, the must that you have, that the citizens have to protect themselves from the tyranny of the regime. Okay, and this is a part of the social contract according to Locke, and the citizens literally have this obligation. Okay, they are armed. The Second Amendment in the United States, the citizens are armed to protect themselves from tyrannical regime. It's a must. Both they must be armed, but also they must shoot. It's not just enough that they have guns; they have to execute, and so that they can save themselves from a tyrannical regime. Okay, this even in a democracy, there are always the chances, right? So this is something um, that can happen, and we see this tension. This tension is with leaders. It can be women leaders. Okay, Sun in the Venus term of Aries, but Sun is at the sun of its exaltation. And Mars is in the Mars domain, but it is in Cancer. And so this denotes not only to a local challenge, but an astrological, cosmological challenge of the people to protect themselves from the regime. Why? Because Mars is fallen in Cancer. Okay, the people, even though armed, okay, unless Mars is making favorable aspects with the moon in the country's chart, and Mars is not in Cancer, so let's say Mars in Scorpio in the chart of a country trining the moon. Okay, then Mars can be very protective of the people, um, or very protective of those who care for Mars, or those who Mars cares for. And um, here the sun is at the sign of its exaltation in a Venusian term in Aries. So here the sun can really shine a certain light. This can be women leaders. This can be, and I mean leaders not of the people, but governors, prime ministers, um, women Martian, women who are Martian in nature, and they can be very exalted here. So even though Mars is friends with Saturn, who is also in a Venus sign, so but but is in Pisces. He's not fallen in Pisces, but you put the planet of structure in the sign of dissolution of boundaries. I, I don't know how can it express itself, Um, Scientific developments, perhaps Mars has here new concepts of time and advancing more and more concepts of time that are in a bit of a Copernicus position with women in power, um, or royal figures that are women that don't accept these new theories, perhaps because they imply on some structure that they're not willing to um, compromise, or they want things to adhere to more Martian notions of cosmology or reality. I don't have a concrete example for how it may express, but that is something that can be. Um, let's look at the chart for the next aspect Mars makes. And I just want to pinpoint when this is the beginning, okay, when Mars is just 2 degrees Cancer. And let's jump. Why am I jumping to May? But we're from? Oh, Leo. So this is already the aspect in Leo. Okay. So this is already the aspect in Leo. It's a lunar return for me, so it's good to make a Kodak moment. Um, this square with Jupiter and Taurus will already be in when Mars is in 1 degree Leo. So we have the aspect between that and the aspect of March 30th, which is the trine. So Mars begins with a trine. It squares the sun, but it separates from a square to the sun. Okay? It was squaring the sun when it was in Gemini, separating, and it begins with a trine. This tells me that this ingress is emphasized by a harmonious aspect to authority that is artistic structure. Well, I won't, I won't have this like no, this is depressing. But there is a harmony between the malefics um, that can express itself in defending a certain structure or defending the people, or there are some authority figures that are with, you know, um, the patriarchy, Saturn, and the militarism, Mars, are in harmony. Okay, so some patriarchal Martian people who are in nature more emotional than they like to admit, are doing something together. And then we have um, here May 22, I think Mars is already in Leo. Yes, this is totally the ingress, so I will pick and we end. So we begin with a trine and we end this with Mars squaring Pluto. This happens Mars squares Pluto on 21st of May 2023. Um Sorry, opposites Pluto. This is already in Leo. Okay, so still in Leo. So Leo is going to be intense. Venus also turns retrograde, and the Mars trines Neptune is 15 degrees. Okay, so this is the last aspect Mars is making in Cancer that is exact. And this is the exact trine to Neptune. Mars was opposing, separating from the squaring Neptune. Try to talk about Neptune without making mistakes. Um, so now we are heading the trine. And this is the cycle of Mars and Neptune. What happened during the conjunction of Mars and Neptune? What happened during the sextile? What happened during the square? Now we have a trine. And a trine is a temporary solution that is both the solution of a conflict and the seed of the next conflict. Okay? Of the inconjunct and later the direct opposition. It is a harmonious aspect. Okay, but there's always dynamic balance between friction and harmony, friction and resolution. Mars is also squaring Jupiter in the analytic degree of Aries, 29th degree. So here, um, but it will perfect the square when it's already in Leo. So it's beginning to apply to the square from Cancer and will perfect it from Leo. So we'll return to that. Just want to go from 15th of May and from March 30 to the 15th of May. And the May 21 is already the ingress to Leo. Next, Mars will cross the nodes. Will sextile the nodes. It will sextile Mercury on April 8th. Sextile the nodes on April 5. Mars will, yeah, we are having a thing here. Because I see two Mars sextile Mercury, and that tells me of the Mercury retrograde, probably. Yes, Mercury retrograde. So that is in the April presentation, where we're having two sextiles to Mercury. Immediately, what I get from this, without even looking, Mars was in Mercury's sign for 7 months, at least 7 months. And now Mars is having a conversation with Mercury when Mars is in Cancer. But the conversation that Mars is having with Mercury is not a one-time fling, okay? They connect 2 times, and the next one will already be in June, because Mercury goes retrograde. So, and in between we have Mars squaring Chiron, which is another potent moment of challenging being potent, and Mars sextile Uranus. A lot of, like, the main angles that I see Mars making here is, except for, the beginning with Saturn and the end with Neptune, is with planets in Taurus. There's one Aries, yeah, one Pisces, Saturn here in Pisces, so encapsulated by Pisces, a bit of challenge here with Aries, but mainly we have this harmony with planets in Taurus. This is a good thing. It tells me that the fallen Mars, like, people got to the point that they were hoping for this fallen Mars to already happen, and this fallen Mars does not refuse um, to yield fruits. Okay, there is a problem here with Chiron. It happens, but all aspects in Cancer are harmonious. All aspects are harmonious, even the Saturn, except for this Chiron thing. And let's touch on the wound. This happens in 27th April, already after the eclipse, and of course I cannot do a Mars episode without addressing the eclipse. Mars is in 17 degrees Cancer. Not the moon is not triggering it, so it's not touched. This aspect is not touched by the moon, but it is touched a day earlier, but before it is perfecting 2 days earlier. We have this exact square to Chiron, while Mars is separating from, is basically applying to sextile Neptune and separating from a sextile with Mercury. So the Chiron friction is mitigated by what we have in Taurus, which is a retrograde reflective Mercury and the Uranus. That tells me that there is an innovative, perhaps more Venusian way to tackle the challenges that arise with Mars touching on wounds. And the wounds in Aries are to do with the sense of self of people. He had the ability to create a third option. And here, there's a friction. The action of Mars. Mars is in a moony sign, is not at home. And that is troublesome because perhaps we need potent action and it's not so available. But there is a voice here, okay? Uranus, Mercury. There's a voice here. There's a reflective voice um, of the revolution. Themes of ableism can really spark here. Aries becomes aware of its ableist perceptions and perhaps begin to radically accept where it's not always fully potent and able to create that third option to assert its own identity, and radical acceptance, Uranus, of its own voice, of its own reflective nature in Cancer, uh, comes comes in handy. It's the type of connection that you create where you can't really perform, whether professionally or even sexually. But it only opens up a new form of radical acceptance, a new form of intimacy, and a new form of third option. Sometimes it's not about paving the path in the sense of being witty and being decisive. Sometimes it's about, think about advocating for even victims of sexual offenses, because what happens in these situations is people can freeze, people can fawn, people can play along, okay, can play along because they are fearful or they don't really get what happens. They still do not give consent, huh? And so defending this situation where you find it difficult to assert your boundaries here with radical acceptance and reflecting on our values in the situation. This can be a classic example of um, healing a certain wound, where it's like radically accepting the fact that this is what happened in traumatic situations. Okay, and then Mars will also trine Chiron. Okay, there can also be an action to defend people who had such moments during trauma at war or in sexual violence or in psychological violence, because the moon, but psychological from the moon's perspective. I don't remember who said the word gaslighting about Mars in Cancer. um, I don't remember who said that, but it's so true because Mars is indirect and can be, passive aggressive, all these things. And so it can both play out as the enact of passive aggressive gaslighting or whatnot, and the defense of victims of psychological violence, whether intended or not intended. Okay, be like, you still have to protect yourself. So this is the wound, and around this wound we have all these angles to, at first the node, at first Rahu, then Mercury, the Sun. Yeah, it will take time to arrive here, but first the node, Mercury, Uranus. So the entire story, and this is why I like to look at what will Mars do in Cancer. If I want to narrate the story, the sequence of Mars going through Cancer, and we can present here a traditional chart of Mars. Here it is in Mercury sign. Where you don't see, in the traditional, you don't see the chironic wound that is being stirred up, where when Chiron is in Mercury's term. Okay? Mars here is again in Mercury's term, Hitting this Chiron in Mercury's term, uh, Jupiter enters the Saturn phase of the Saturn term of Aries, and Mercury is still in Mercury's term. So when we look at it, when we in the deeper resolution, when we add the terms, we just see a bunch of Mercury there when Mercury itself is retrograde. So Mars in Mercury's term, Mercury in Mercury's term, um, and that extra Mercury emphasis. And we now know that Chiron, modernly, Chiron is here in Mercury's term. No? And Aries is in Mars term, I believe, already by now. So that is already pointing out that communication, lack of communication, the ability and the inability to say no. Okay. Yes, no, maybe. The ability and the inability to say yes, no, maybe. To assert yourself, to assert your boundaries, to assert your emotional boundaries. Communication over your emotional boundaries. Asserting your sense of self emotionally. Those will be challenged when Mercury is retrograde, and radical acceptance is needed for previous ableistic traditions and perceptions around the ability to assert your boundaries. Okay. Uranus is also in Taurus. Uranus is the natural disaster. Uranus is the storm. Uranus is the revolution. Okay. And you know that a voice can only be suppressed so much. It will find its way out through a natural disaster, okay, earthquakes and so on. So volcanic eruption, volcanic activity, and people who are working with the spirits of the land, the spirits, and so on, they understand this, shamanistic people and so on, they get that. Okay, it's not that God forbid if somebody was hurt in a natural disaster that they're somehow to blame. No, no, absolutely not. Um, but it is the understanding that the forces and the voice cannot be repressed. The voice of the land cannot be repressed. And there can be an explosive revolution. So you can only silence these people so much. You can only gaslight these people so much until they begin to speak. And when they do, Mercury will not be retrograde forever and Mars will go Leo. But then Venus will already begin to go retrograde in August. So this is something to pay attention to. Okay? Venus, the ruler of everything that mitigates the Saturn chironic wound, the Mars chironic wound. What is the Saturn? I don't know. Venus is in Gemini. Um, and she sextiles this Chiron. The entire way we perceive Mars, the Martian, the penis, because Mars, um, Martian men, the Martian aspect of women, gender, is going through a revolution by merit of Uranus and Venus sign, but also by merit of Aries in general, and by merit of the eclipses. So here we see April 29, we have the exact sextile between Mars and Uranus, and whoever tried to silence, to repress, to avoid being held accountable for illegal orders, okay, illegal orders, because Mars can be orders. It's not just the orders of Saturn. Mars can be orders, so illegal orders. Unfortunately, Saturn in Neptune sign can be illegal orders. um, and illegal orders in war, illegal orders in organizations, illegal orders in a juristic system, in the police, whoever is in the place where they keep the person who find it difficult to express their voice and assert themselves from having rights, from having the emotional safety. Okay, what is more Mars in Cancer than emotional safety? Okay, and asserting yourself, okay, in the face of bullies or emotional bullies. Um, there's an outer planet here, there's Uranus here. So, unfortunately, yes, that can also indicate events where people cannot assert themselves throughout the whole Mars Cancer thing. This is the wound. Asserting yourself, saying no, setting a boundary psychologically, emotional extortion, all these things. This is the wound. But also, this sextile, okay, um, already denotes where there is a storm that rearranges things. So we have the wound and the addressing, the beginning of the addressing of the wound being presented. Um, we can go earlier to the charts of the nodes. Mars sextiles the North Node, and where's the North Node with Venus? What are we experiencing in the past year and a half of eclipses on Scorpio and Taurus? What are we experiencing? We're experiencing collapse of coinage, okay, both digitation of coinage and the collapse. So the volatility in digital markets. We experience the volatility of the rights of Venusian of women. We experience controversy around transgenders, and controversy. This controversy is also amongst transgenders, the people who are like, hey, what I liked Hawk on Twitter that said, hey, my body dysphoria is not a prerequisite to change my sex. And then on the exact opposite direction, people who have had surgeries to change their sex and are like, oh my gosh, I wish I knew what it would do to my fertility. I wish I was not being able to do that at a younger age or whatnot. There's a range of voices around the experience of transgender, gender nonconforming, and also the ability to use technology in medicine to alter your sex, okay, to alter your body. Um, Venus is also pleasures. Um, what else? Well, of course, on a mundane level, Ukraine having to defend itself, being Taurus ruled, and fight for freedom. So but also controversies amongst that. Okay, they talked about the Cream region and how important it is to treat marginalized societies right, because they will pair up with whomever they provides safer conditions, even if they are not the ideal uh, partner or ruler. We've experienced multiple elections in Israel that are beginning to kind of crescendo into a revolution that delves directly into the identity of the Israeli state. And Israel has the sun quite close to where Uranus is. So Uranus is, I don't remember if it's applying to Israel's sun or on Israel's sun. Um, so we see that any country that has major Taurus placements is subjected to these effects more so than the others. We've also seen an earthquake in Turkey, which I believe had to do with the Scorpio axis. Okay, so being ruled by Scorpio or the Scorpio line. Um, and that is something, another natural disaster that had occurred. So all these things are in the background, and Ketu was ruled by Mars. Ra was ruled by Venus, but Venus was with Ketu, and now we're heading to a set of eclipses, which I talk about a lot, where Ra is in Aries and Ketu is in Libra, but Mars is going to also be with Libra. Uh, in between, there is the eclipse, and of course, I cannot do any Mars, who is the ruler of Ketu in this eclipse still, but is also the ruler of the eclipse because the eclipse is on the 29th degree of Aries, and so I must go to eclipses. 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 There it is. Thank you. April 20. Oh, we have April 20 and my 5, but this, yeah, but the April 20 is what matters. And here Mars is right on my moon, thank you very much. Sextiling a direct Mercury, separating from a sextile but direct Mercury, not applying to any aspect, to any traditional aspect. So Mars is ruled by the moon now, and the moon is in the 29th degree of Aries. So we have this interesting reception between the moon and Mars during the eclipse. So hybrid solar eclipse. And this interesting mutual reception of Mars in its fall, and the eclipse point here with the moon. Why do I have my left like go? I wonder why. It's like I'm experiencing something in the body right now. So my left hand in the middle began to be like a bit arthritic. Um, that was interesting. Like I don't understand why. Anyway, um, when the ruler of the eclipse is in this interesting reception, even though it is at its fall and it is not ruled in any way by, it's not in a Mars term anymore. It's not, while Mars is at its fall, it is not as detrimental as Mars with Ketu, to my opinion. You can have a different opinion, which you can argue in a separate video and link to mine, and I would love to watch it. But in my opinion, Mars being even in its fall, with this interesting reception with the moon, is actually not as harmful in as far as Mars is concerned. I mean, this is a sextile that applies to square Pluto. This did I say that this is a solar eclipse that applies to square Pluto? A sextile because of the reception. It's a solar eclipse that applies to square Pluto. There is this sextile with Mercury. In the Mercury, um, I believe it's Mercury phase, but I'm decan, but I'm not sure. I think it's also Mercury term here of Taurus. Rao is still Venus ruled. Venus is in Gemini. So there's disruption. And this disruption definitely involves what Mars will do in Cancer. This leads me to actually delineate. I do want to do the 12 houses. I didn't think I will do the 12 signs. So I'm going to just begin to do it and see what happens. So for Ascendant Taurus, Mars is going to spend the time in your third house with the eclipse in happening in between. So the eclipse happening in your 12th. I addressed the eclipse separately. But Mars will make this passage in your third house. Anything to do with siblings, very good friends, the friends you feel sibling relate like a brother, like a sister, is going to be intensely, I'd say transformed rather than disrupted. There will be any place where you or your sibling had difficulty to express yourself, to say yes, no, and maybe. And I really like the Tom Jacobs lists of meditations about learning to say yes, no, and maybe, and healing this part, because we desire to say yes, no, and maybe so we can assert ourselves, so we can enjoy life with less frustration within ourselves. Because even with the best of friends and siblings around us or partners around us, um, we still want to be able to express ourselves. Like it is not about defending yourself from violation, in as much as it is about having a genuine connection where you speak up, right? And so um, this whole issue, this whole Mars wound that is intertwined with an eclipse. Okay, so this eclipse will directly have at least something to do with the aftermath of trauma, feigning, fawning, freezing, attacking. It can also be, because Mars in Cancer can also be aggressive, over asserting, like aggressive rather than assertive. It's like I want to tell you no, but I treat you like you're a rapist where you didn't do anything like that, and I don't think you did. You just triggered. You pressed some trigger point, and I respond to you as if you are, the offender. That is exactly the type of cycle that we are having now with Mars in Cancer. Um, and on a bigger level, it can also manifest in international relations and people who serve in the frontier, dealing with trauma, veterans, accepting veterans, um, addressing these issues. So for you, it's going to be third house. It's going to be sibling relations. Maybe you have a sibling who is recovering from PTSD, and it doesn't matter if it is from war, from CPTSD, prolonged abuse. That can also be captivation or something like that, or violent abuse of any sort, or domestic abuse, sexual abuse. Um, there are differences, but there are a lot of similarities. Way that we need to accommodate. Okay. And the eclipse here is going to be a huge emphasis. Okay, it's a huge emphasis on how we perceive this topic. It's like if we haven't addressed it yet, we're going to address it even times 10 when eclipses are formed. And Rahu is still with Venus, but Rahu will go to Aries, that is Mars' world, and Mars will be in Libra in the time of the 2024 eclipses. Okay, so we're gonna have a Mars that is purging something to do with relational balance, Libra, balancing, pleasing, people pleasing, not knowing how to assert the boundaries, or what are the boundaries, okay? There can be so much merging that you don't know what are the boundaries to some extent. And this is why the trine that we begin this month with, where, the ingress begins with the trine to supply, trine to Saturn. It's like Saturn is structure and letting go, saying no, sleeping, also dedication, and not giving up. And Mars is passion, determination, penetration, assertion, boundaries. Okay, so they are both planets of boundaries, it's just different assertion. And both of them are in water signs. So it's like, hey, we have to reconceptualize how do we allow for the fluidity, whether it's in gender, whether it's in human relations or in artistic creation or any sort of relations. Okay, it's watery, it's connecting. How do we allow for both respecting each other's boundaries and connecting spontaneously, knowing that the boundaries are flexible and we do not disrespect the boundaries of another. Okay, so issues around consent, defending yourself from emotional violence. We need to reconceptualize this. Okay, so there are going to be a lot of times to address this. For you, if you're ascendant Taurus, Mars is triggering the third house, and the eclipse is in the 12th. But it's mainly Mars, and because Mars is sextiling planets in your first house, you're going to get extra attention. Okay, you may be the voice of the revolution right now. Okay, at least around the eclipse. Ascendant Gemini. Mars is in your second house. Values, self value, okay, how much you value yourself, your skill, and what you can make money from, which is your skill, the money you make from offering your services, basically, as well as your expenditure. Those will go through a certain reconstruction. You might find yourself tackling the yes, no, and maybe and defending yourself from ableist views in trade when you make a purchase. So it can be something as simple as you made this purchase, but this purchase is very expensive. Now you have a debt or something, and you need actually laws that protect you in this case, so that you are not robbed of your money because. And required to take responsibility, where perhaps the reason you didn't say no has to do with some childhood sexual trauma that you had, and so you became a people pleaser as a coping mechanism. Okay, Moon is relating to our inner nourishing and childhood memories, attachment stuff. And second house can also be your self value, but it can be something as simple as you can't say no to these people calling you and offering you things because they're so nice and they're so assertive, and they invade your space, and they trigger you, and your reaction is to fawn. Okay, so it's not like, oh, take responsibility over your life, change your decision, learn to say no. Okay, yes, it's important, but also you do need rules that defend you from that, or at least to be forgiven debt if that causes debt, like you should not pay for the times you were molested as a child or whatnot. And that can already also be a situation where you get to the other. Okay, um, you might want to spend money to protect yourself, or spend a lot of money for things that could protect you or that have the potentials to protect you, and that can be fruitful or not. With Karen, there will be a wound around, like there would be a friction around that. Okay, that you're feeling emotionally safe in the world versus your sense of self. Something's going on, and you can also be, aggressive, in that sense, or perhaps you value aggression but you can't exert it, or you value nonviolence but now you're forced to be more assertive and even aggressive with someone, and that is difficult. It's a difficult time. The eclipse, of course, is going to create a surge of raising, like having to rethink, reconceptualize this whole concept, um, to a hopefully less ableistic uh, point of view, and having to readdress it, readdress when people cannot do the optimum in terms of Martian, the Martian function. Ascendant Cancer. Mars is going through your first house. Now it's for you, it's especially good time to check if Mars is in your night sector or your day sector. That means is the sun below between the ascendant and the descendant in your natal chart? This would make you night. That would mean Mars is can cause a bit accidents, okay, but it's probably not going to kill you unless it's aspect in Mars, like Saturn or and many other things. Okay, so like you're probably not going to die. Um, if it is a day chart, then this is a time to. If I try to think about something that could help in this situation, well, Mars. Well, you need to, carrying garlic with you on your body can be something that you use to deflect, to protect. If your diet allows consuming garlic, that can be good. If you become sick, like having fever during this time, then that can be even a natural remedy. You can eat Marcy things while they are hot, and then you sweat, and then you sweat it out. So that can be the solution for you. Again, I'm not your doctor. I don't know. But definitely your life path as well as your body will experience this Marcy thing. Oh, another thing that can happen if you, if you have a penis or not, like you could run into difficulties to function sexually, and that is inviting you to rethink. Like it can be rethinking the sexual encounter, it can be rethinking the wisdom of the penis. And I shared this story about erection, where certain men said that if their partner is not ready, they will have like been from like fully hard to like completely dropping, because their bodies connect, and the wisdom of like literally the wisdom of the penis tells them that she's not ready, so they're not turned on by violating their boundaries. That does not mean that an erect penis means her or his boundaries. That an erect penis means that everybody is ready, including you. And that is something that you might want to think about if this catches you in that position. Um, the eclipse in Aries also rules the mind, the mindset. So it's a shift of mindset. And also we're going through this gender transformation, okay? Perhaps you're attracted to new genders. Perhaps, you used to be drawn to more like softy men or women, and they discover their Martian side, and you're like, okay, like how do you process that? Is it something that you need to change in your mind? Is it just deciding on a different partner? But whoever softy person, they will also have to assert their boundaries, and maybe they're aggressive, maybe they're fawning, maybe you are in this position. And so all of these questions come into mind, and it can be a bit of a crisis time. uh, of course, it can be a time where you have accidents, because Mars is also accidents. So, carry a garlic or whatnot, and do a Mars mediation for that. Ascendant Leo. Mars is going to spend time in your 12th house. All the while, the eclipse is going to just, be there with its ruler in your 12th house. So there is a constitutional transformation to your astral body. Okay? That can be nightmares that you experience, and go over protocols of working with nightmares. Okay? Perhaps if you had a bad dream, you can wake up, write it down, or begin to visualize how would you rather end this dream. Okay, the people ask ask a Cancer ascendant. They've been having 7 months of this. So ask a Cancer ascendant how to deal with nightmares. They had 7 months. Okay, they'll let you know. Um, so if that is the experience, there can be aggressive thoughts, invasive thoughts. Okay, can be, or invasive emotions. Um, Protecting, learn how the type of protection from psychic attack where you are the agent of this protection. So it's not like you go to a shaman, you go to a doctor, you go to this person, you go to a healer, and they do, like energy wash and they protect you. And if you experience that again, you come to them. No. Learn the type of practices that work for you, where you assert yourself in the body. So this is what Mars asks. The eclipse might be a point where you learn how to do that, especially if you're a day chart, actually. Okay? You might have experienced non-dual, I call them non-dual experiences. Um, People call them psychic attacks. Some people call it even psychosis. And actually, the way to deal with psychosis is exactly to see it as non-dual experience and begin to find a way for you where you are returning to your own body and present in your body. Okay, if you've had these experiences, you know what I'm talking about. That can be the case, and this eclipse will, kind of make you more aware of the need to address that. Okay, and of course, 12th house can also be hidden enemies. Um, a lot of the practices for psychic attack can address that, because it's what is a hidden enemy. Okay, and how do they try to operate? If you work in the energy field, then you address it in energy. So when Mars gets to the first, to the first house, you're less likely to experience bad implications in the physical. And of course, both you and Cancer are very affected by eclipses, by the merit of being ruled by the luminaries. And so eclipse is going to do this. There can also be some hidden trauma, something you didn't know that you didn't know that has to do with the things I'm talking about, rather regarding to saying yes, no, and maybe. Tom Jacobs' series of meditations about this particular topic of returning, reclaiming your body, and all the different reasons that you could be challenged by that, and all the different ways to go back to doing that, is something I highly recommend. And if I'm not mistaken, it is free. Like he really made it free for people to access this information. So you don't even have to buy anything to do that, and that can be a good resource for you. Um, yeah, do take into account this eclipse, 12th house, everything that this house signifies, whether it's hospitals, hotels, seclusion, bedroom, they might be more highlighted in your life at this time. uh, Ascendant Virgo. The eclipse happens in your the eclipse. The Mars in Cancer happening in your 11th house. Conflicts, arguments, learning to assert your boundaries in your social endeavors. Okay, your social media, your podcasts. If you're leading a podcast, maybe some boundaries that you need to set, and there may be, creative content is also something I would pay attention to here. So you might run into a situation here. So if you are a content creator, that can be, or there can be a violation of boundaries here, where where the assertion can come out as too emotional, or relatively actually not, not assertive, not um, potent enough to make an impact, in which case you still should not be deprived of your rights, right? So this is where you may experience this conflict. Conferences where you go to, maybe some people say some sharp words, or people react very emotionally. You can give a lecture, and this lecture can be something that you didn't think is going to be too like it can be thought provoking but not provocative, and your audience responds in such an emotional surge of like harsh words and like attacking you for no reason or invading your privacy or whatnot. That can definitely express itself in this way. So that's more like be aware and understand. And even if you didn't assert yourself the way, like if you came across as too aggressive or did this is a time for radical acceptance, which you will have with all these sextiles to Chiron and Venus. There can be a Venusian figures. You know, I have Sun and Venus in Taurus, and all I'm saying in this episode is like accept yourself, accept yourself, accept yourself. So at this situation, there may be Venusian figures that will stand up for you, that will speak up, or that will notice that, or that will accept you, or that will even notify you. Yes, maybe something that happens that you didn't know. Ascendant Libra. So you are also ruled by Venus, just as the entire mitigating forces in Taurus are. Mars is in your 10th house. Conflicts with your parents, with your boss, with being a boss. And I really like, when I talk about the 10th house, I'd really like to refer to the insight of Catherine, the family, with the family astrologer, and she talked about the 4th house and the 10th house being both your mother and father, or father and father, or mother and mother. And that is something to keep in mind. So I cannot predict which parent, okay, or which boss figure. It is a Cancer ruled boss figure. Okay? It is a lunar boss figure. Your boss might be going through certain transformation because of the eclipse. You might, during this month, during April, especially 20th April, around that, before that, after that, you might lose a position. Okay, your partner is highly your partnership, business partnership, or romantic is highly involved here. You might lose a position. You might but it is to make place for something different in your life, maybe for being more with your partner, because Rahu will be eventually in your 7th house, and now there are issues or something like that. So it can be the case that if you get fired, if you lose a position, if you get a bit demoted in this time, you look at the greater picture. You need to reassess your first house, 7th house axis in the coming 2 years, so that your aspirations, okay, your 10th, 4th, will go more smoothly, as well as a result of that. Okay, because this is an axis. So while you can also gain a position, okay, you can gain a position. In that case, if you do gain a position, it can be that it will be after the eclipse, after the square with Chiron. There's a conflict, there's something that's stirred up, and then as a result of that, you can get fired from one place but get a better position in another. Okay, even if you do get a better position, because your 10th house and your 11th house are ruled by luminaries, you know that they're subjected to changes around eclipses anyway. So that depends on what do you have. What does this Mars meet to begin with? Ascendant Scorpio. So you are ruled by this Mars, and it happens in your 9th house. Aries is your 6th. So conflict of worldview, teachers, about being a teacher, conflicts in academic stuff. If you're writing not a blog, but let's say a thesis, okay, or an a novel or a book, like something big. Okay, 'cause the ninth house is not the vlog that you write every day. Okay, like I download vlog, like I upload vlogs every day. It's the third house activity, third house perfection right now. But actually, the grand thesis or something that you write that is a large body of work, there can be difficulties in the drive, okay, in getting it done. And those difficulties are to do with the mission at hand, okay? There are sets of eclipses that address directly your 12th and 6th house. So if you're addressing any sort of health issue, mental health, work issues, okay, health and work, the birth and death can also be in a way, like labor and death. All these issues, if that is somehow to do with what's going on in the ninth house for you, then understand that if you're in the academia, you might need an extra year or even extra 2 years. But this is because it's just the natural evolution of things. Okay, it can be that you will shift and change your subject of study as well. You have to incorporate, like, you're studying the Mars, you're studying the Martian, you're changing your worldview about anything that I said about protecting the motherland, armed people, the power of armed people in the face of Regulian figures, the natural square between Aries, which is the place of the sun's exaltation, and Cancer, which is the place of the moon exaltation, moon representing the people, sun representing um, the rulership, the leaders, the Regulian figures. So politics, if you're doing anything political or psychological or educational, okay, then perhaps you will begin to understand the shift and you begin to understand the intricate conflict that is inherent to rulership and the people, and to some extent the solar parent, the lunar parent. Okay, there's an inherent friction there by the merit of this square. Okay, um, and when especially while the sun is still in Aries, then you begin to see how those conflicts can be also inherent. Okay, Leo, if from the vantage point of Leo, Cancer is in the 12th house from Leo. Okay, think about this. Okay, if this is your worldview, think about this. Cancer is in the 12th house from Leo. Okay, so what um, what the king or queen see the least is the people by structural merit. Okay, the sun doesn't look at the cosmos. Okay, she's leading or he's leading, and then the planets revolve around it. Okay, there's a blind spot for any leader, any Regulian figure, any solar figure. The blind spot is the reflection, is the lunar. This is also the source of attraction. Okay, but when it comes to the mundane level, if you're doing something, anything related to that, world events will point at this friction, would point at these relations between the houses. Okay, but for the Cancer, Leo is the second from Cancer. So if you are the people, how you value yourself has to do, or how you value the motherland has to do with your rulers. Your value, your even your self value, is having to do with the Sol. Okay, Sol, Sol, the sun, the rulers, who are the kings even in the democracyest of democracies. They are kings. Okay, the rock star, the pop star, the personal politics, all of that. And Mars with the eclipse is very likely to address these themes. It doesn't matter what are you, whether it's education, psychology, even tourism, okay, managing of hospitalities or whatnot. Even then, Martian things, security has an effect, leader, politics has an effect, and so on and so forth. Um, Ascendant Sagittarius. So your Jupiter ruled, Jupiter is with Aries, which is Mars ruled, and this Mars is in your 8th house, um, which can be, again, 8th house, debts, debt, inheritance, death, generational wealth, generational ancestral healing needed, or ancestral trauma. Those can all be stirred up. The eclipse will give you a new point of view, something that was hidden from your eye regarding this house. Conflicts that you have, perhaps ancestrals around the family, to do with boundaries, maybe with inheritance, taxes, debt. Perhaps you become more informed, and you can address that. Giving consent regarding a will perhaps will be an issue. Who can agree on a will, who cannot agree? Maybe you're thinking about yourself, maybe about your loved ones or your partner. So those issues will be stirred up, and you will get to think about them philosophically, as well as having to apply by praxis your philosophy. You'll have to apply here things by praxis, because Mars is a planet of action, decisive action, and Mars is having a very difficult time to be decisively active, and so radical acceptance is needed. And there is your 6th house. You might want to even work or advocate for certain cases where consent is hard to come by, regarding wills, regarding debt. You might advocate for people who got in debt. So if that was, the thing about the Gemini ascendants, you might advocate for a Gemini. Maybe you begin, your job changes, um, or something of that sort. So, and it can affect your health quite a while. Like it can, you might even deal with a certain ailment that invokes this issue, and it doesn't have to be like in a terminal ailment or not at all, not at all. Although Mars is ruling your 6th house, it can be simply the very effect of having, even inflammation or something like that, or having the flu. Okay, could also be having the flu. You just have the flu, and it's not even a severe case of flu, and then something comes up, and you learn something about your family, about this, about that, and you are mentally very much affected, psychologically very much affected by this, little flu, because it stirs up all kinds of things that you didn't know, and then you decide to advocate for, you decide to do something, be of service to the world around it, following the eclipse or something like that. Ascendant Capricorn. Mars is in your 7th house. So, for you, some conflicts may arise um, with your significant others. So, Mars has left your 6th house, and there was someone posting on Twitter, they were like, okay, finally pampering themselves or finally feeling better with Mars entering, to Cancer. And Mars was still in the 29th degree of Gemini, for which I made the bad joke of, well, the good news is you're going to be very healthy when you're arguing with your partner. And that might be the delineation for you. Because your Gemini place is, you have a benefic entering your Gemini place. Mercury is going to go a bit retrograde in Taurus. Mercury is not in a good sign, but you definitely are not sorry for Mars leaving your 6th house. That being said, Mars can still be harsh words, gaslighting, aggression, and all kind of things. And this is in your 7th house. Planets of conflict you and your significant other are in a situation where you have to assert yourselves, and there's a problem to do so. Okay, so radical acceptance is needed at every step. It does come from the fifth house. Okay, so doing something that you enjoy doing together can come to the rescue. At least you're doing something that you can enjoy, and you might find the words even. Okay, um, so the eclipse can change. It can be the point of this radical acceptance that you have around those Mars function in your life, and this is also to do with your upbringing in your case, to do with your social life. That that whole transformation can allow for an actual partnership to form that is realistic, that is updated to who you are now, is compatible. You learn certain aspects that you need to address. It may be through working on certain things, certain skills, communication skills, or assertion skills, or just being aware, being informed. It could also be evacuating the space for this relationship to be created. So if you are in a relationship, yes, there can be severing of ties. Alternatively, it can just be a significant change to the relationship, like you could actually have a baby together. That is also a possibility. Um, so all of the above. Okay. Ascendant Aquarius. So for you, Mars is in the sixth house. Yes, Mars is in the sixth. No, yes, Mars is in the sixth house. This is so confusing. Um, your it can be your work. It can be somebody who works for you. You have a conflict with your employees, or you are an employee. You have an open enemy here. It may be that you have an open enemy um, that you need to address. There's a conflict that you need to address, or simply a conflict. Okay, it's enmity is just like if we disagree right now, then we're in enmity, so to speak. But if we find a way to bridge that, or to even agree to disagree, then we reduce our conflict, right? So sixth house can also be that. It's to your colleagues, the people you compete with. It can be your pet is having, or you could be having a new pet, or learning how to train your pet. You have a pet and you learn how to train your pet. It's also the house of pets. Um, you could give labor, like it could be the break of the water breaks, and the head of the baby comes in. And it can happen around an eclipse. Like I predict that to happen around an eclipse if that is the case, although it doesn't have to be. Um, what else? Oh, health, of course. So, the risk of Mars, heat, fever, inflammation, related. If you are in a menstruation cycle this month, it can be. I know I have my moon in Cancer. It can be perhaps more bloody. Okay, more blood. So you could use some. You could lose some blood at this time, especially if it happens after the eclipse, because this is a new moon, and then the moon grows. If before the eclipse, perhaps less, more mitigated. So you could be more exhausted, more tired, enraged, emotionally volatile, and all these things. And that's something to consider. If you know it now, you consider it now, then you can take the time to take the time. Um, so that that can be the case for you. Ascendant Pisces. So this is your fifth house. What you do for fun is argue. Okay, you're angry, you're furious, um, and yeah, and you enjoy combat. You have an emotional need to have a combat. but it also exhausts you because you're like, it's not what your fifth house in can, unless you have Mars natally there, it's a Mars return for you. But your fifth house is about nourishing and being nourished. You need nourishment, and now there is conflict. Romantically, you could be argumentative. Can also be with some of your caregivers. Okay, for me, when Mars ingressed into Cancer, I began to assert my boundaries in an explosive way, and I'm like, okay, that needed to release. Why? Um, so, Aries is in your second house. Your ability to assert yourself can be trauma around that. And if that is to do with romantic relationship, boundaries violation, romance, and so on, um, that can be the case. For others, it can be a completely different thing because fifth house is also house of children, and the first child you could be having a child. Um, and if you will, they will have this Mars in Cancer. Okay, they will need to kick things. They would need to, maybe if you're pregnant and this is your fifth house, then the baby kicking in the womb. Okay, they're like they won't let go. Like, and so do not eat hot spices. That will not remedy Mars. Like in that case, but that's something that I can say, huh? But or it's you can also cook food that if you're not pregnant or becoming or in the process of becoming pregnant, you can actually cook food that is spicy. It's time to gear up your chili. It's time to gear up your garlic. It's time to gear up your wasabi. I don't know. Um, so sushi with wasabi, all these things are can actually be remedial. They will not be remedial to the point of like the eclipse stuff. On the other hand, they they can mitigate the excess, the unnecessary drama, because Mars is going to be in your fifth house during the eclipse. Okay, not the time to date people. Just saying. You might, whether it's your day or night sect, like you might want to wait with that a little bit. Um, at this time because all the eclipses on Mars and Venus, while for some people it can mean, oh, I met the love of my life and so on and so forth, and that can be true. It does mean that Mars and Venus are going through um, revision, and what we look for in a romantic partner, Pisces, fifth house, can change. So, yeah, for me, it's like exactly on my moon. So I can be like extremely aggravated in that day, but this depends on what you have there, what you have in Cancer. Ascendant, last but not least, ascendant Aries. So Mars is in your fourth house, and that means family drama, family feud, not a family feud. Um, Big drama, big drama in the house. Um, all the relational. Okay, it's time to tend to ancestral healing. If you're doing ancestry work, maybe they can help. Maybe they can call. You can call in for your ancestors. If you have altars for the deceased, then perhaps put some Mars-related stuff there that is compatible with your ancestors. If somebody liked garlic in your family, this is the time to put it on their altar. If somebody likes chili, this is the time to put it on their altar. But black pepper, well, which is protective, and if issues arise, you can ask for these ancestors to protect, to change your point of view, or to you can just turn to them or you just connect with them. It can also be a time of remediation of relations, grossly speaking. Okay, so not necessarily when Mars is in Cancer, but that can be a time of that remediation. Um, arguments, conflicts about land, buying, boundaries, okay, the property tax, all these things. Time to address this. Tend to that. When you at least tend to that, uh, it will take like things will take their course, and there's not so much to do other than make sure you have a place where you can you will be involved because you are either steering this up or it's directly affecting you because you are the ruler of the ascendant, right? Mars in Cancer in your fourth house. And the eclipse here is in your first house. So if you have ascendant around the last decan of Aries, you will be even more affected. Okay, especially around the last two terms of Aries, you will be even more affected by this whole passage of Mars in Cancer, and especially the eclipse. It will mean that Pluto is now squaring your ascendant. So it's not just Mars, it's also Pluto remediation needed to tackle. And uh, there's a hell of a lot of a lot. So anybody, like you would need to pick and sift through people who offer um, evolutionary astrology reading, generational healing. My preference is all, especially with ascendant Aries that rules the self, where you pave the path, and Chiron in this house. So my preference is that you gravitate towards those who can offer you um, some praxis that you do for yourself and you perfect on and you change and play with, and you do that rather than trying to go for a shamanistic journeying where you can actually have a problem with your shaman because Pluto is also representing your psychoanalyst, okay, a psychologist. Those shamans that do shamanic journeying that are transformational, the two spirits, the healers, all of those people are also Plutonian. They're both Neptunian and Plutonian. And if Pluto is squaring your ascendant, then your relationship with those people who offer these Plutonic consultation will be problematic. So you need to do some self study here, the way I see it, to get the better results. Okay, so for example, I would not invite you for a reading even if I did give Pluto consultations because I see immediately that there is conflict, there is friction. No, this is something that you need to study for yourself from resources that are available and recorded. Like this is the better. It's better for you to buy a recorded seminar of someone rather than to join even a virtual thingy. Beware of people trying to drag you in, or all these deep psychological maneuvers. Because if you're not well aspected with therapy, it means that you will find this conflict in therapy, and do not rely on them being um, able to sort this out in a way that is harmoniously benefic to you. Okay, you can benefit from your enemies, but in this case, yes, absolutely, your therapist can be your enemy in this case. Um, and they can be very famous. Okay, here the Aquarius is in your 11th house, so those people that you need to assert yourself with any case with social groups absolutely do not seek consultation, in my opinion. Okay, maybe I'm wrong. Okay, maybe I'm completely wrong, and this is actually something that you should do, and I'm just paranoid about it. And so it's a problem here, because if I'm trying to give you consultation, I'm already planning to taking this Pluto placement that's in conflict with your ascendant. So you'd have to figure it out. So yeah, of course you have an eclipse in the first house. So all that it entails, a shift of perspective regarding your identity, your life path, your sense of self, how to treat your body. Okay, can be something. It can be something as simple as nutritional change, but there is also contact to maybe owning land, grave, ancestral healing, family of origin, the family that you run if you have household. So all of these rise into question. Uh, yeah, that was it. Not a lot. Yeah, not a lot to say about it. Mars um, isn't doing a hell of a lot, but it's also doing a hell of a lot. um, Remember, a word of compassion. We pray to be compassionate with ourselves and others for our triggered reactions, and prayer to know to set the space for ourselves to feel things rather than to act out. Okay. Personal space to feel is very important. um, and unfortunately it is not so much a time where you can be, especially towards the eclipse. The nourishment is self-care. The nourishment is self-care and compassionate with ourselves and others, because there can be a bit of a challenge, of a conflict, it's like somebody wants to hug you and you begin to argue with them. Okay. Or you want to hug someone and they begin to argue with you, because both arguing about something. And I don't mean it in the cheap way, I mean it in the sense of there genuinely is some rules, some things to discuss, some disagreements that touch on emotional places. And it's not that they blow out of proportion, it's that they are in the proportion and they're finally being addressed at the proportion. And this proportion is very individual. Okay? How much I am bothered by your entering the room when I'm recording and start speaking to me about something after I said I'm recording is individual. And it's also dynamic. By the nature of the moon, it is dynamic. Okay? So if the moon is doing something good, I might be, oh dear, I forgot to tell you. And if the moon is doing something bad, I might give you the look. I told you that I'm recording. Huh? And that can be how Mars in Cancer operates here. So it's quite intense. Um, Also remember that both you and the people in the situation, they're just trying to say the yes, no, and maybe. They're just trying to say yes when it's a yes, no when it's a no, and maybe when it's a maybe. Because sometimes you're indecisive and that has a right. You still don't know yet. Sometimes you still don't know. And sometimes maybe you won't know. Okay? Those are the things to keep in mind. Um, and, and just address that. Okay? So even the people who are being manipulative, passive aggressive, so they're probably not doing that on purpose to destroy you. And even if they seem to, or they are, underneath of that, yes, there is trauma. And you're not their psychologist, you're not their healer. You can't let them depend on you all that much, or you can't depend on them all that much. And that's signaling all of you, both of you, all of you, that some realignment of the boundaries is needed for the higher good. How, what, I don't know. That, like, there's eclipse on April, so we won't know. On a mundane level, yes, it's an interesting time. So um, I think I said pretty much everything about the obligatory Mars ingress into Cancer. Um, Let's have a safe play, people.